I blocked my mother on every social media platform and convinced myself I was teaching her a necessary lesson about boundaries. I stared at the failed delivery notifications with pride, thinking her silence meant I had won. But 3 nights ago, while watching her command the room from the stage of a charity gala, the truth finally hit me. I had not cut her off. She had simply decided she no longer needed my permission to be happy. My name is Dylan Briggs. I am 35 years old, a tech entrepreneur in Austin, Texas. And right now, there are 4,000 people watching this TikTok live stream waiting for me to talk about scaling startups. But I am going to talk about something else. I blocked my mother on every single platform I own. I blocked her number. I blocked her email. I told myself I was setting boundaries for my mental health. I thought I was absolutely right to cut her out of my life until the night of my wedding. That was the night I realized silence is not always a punishment you inflict on others. Sometimes it is a wall they build to keep you out. The Texas sun was relentless over Laurel Creek Ranch. But the chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather. I am 62 years old, a retired nurse from North Ridge Community Clinic, and I was standing at the edge of my only son's wedding, looking like a stain on a silk sheet. My dress was navy blue. It was clean, pressed, and had served me well for church services and funerals for a decade. But against the pastel designer gowns of the Collins family guests, it looked exactly like what it was. Cheap. The guests from the bride's side were titans of the Austin real estate world. They looked at me the way people look at a smudge on a wine glass. It was a mix of irritation and polite pity. I tried to find my name card on the front tables where the parents usually sit. It was not there. A young wedding coordinator with a headset and a clipboard hurried over to me. She did not make eye contact. "I'm so sorry, Ma'am," she muttered. "But there's been a slight error in the seating chart arrangement." She guided me away from the front, past the middle rows, and all the way to the very back. She pointed to a single empty chair squeezed between the videography equipment and the swinging kitchen doors, where the servers were already clanking silverware. I stood there, humiliated, and looked toward the altar. I saw my son, Dylan, standing next to Savannah. She looked radiant and terrifyingly perfect. She leaned in close to him, her voice low but perfectly pitched, so it carried over the quiet hum of the gathering crowd. "I don't want your mother's poverty ruining the aesthetic of the wedding video," she whispered, her smile never faltering. "My family has a reputation to uphold." "Dylan?" I waited for Dylan to speak. I waited for him to tell her that I had worked double shifts for 20 years to pay for his college tuition. I waited for him to walk down the aisle and escort me to the front. Instead, Dylan looked down at his shoes. He pulled out his phone and pretended to check a notification. He chose silence. That was the moment I stopped waiting. I took my seat in the last row, next to a stack of plastic crates. I gripped the stem of my champagne flute until my knuckles turned white. "I am done begging," I whispered to myself. "If they want me in the shadows, I will stay in the shadows." The women in the row ahead of me did not know I was there, or perhaps they simply did not care. Their perfumes were heavy and expensive. "Is that the groom's mother?" one of them hissed. "I heard she's just a nurse at some community clinic." "Poor thing." Another laughed softly. Her entire pension probably wouldn't cover the cost of the alterations on Savannah's dress. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I was about to lower my head to hide my face when a shadow fell over me. A man settled into the empty folding chair beside me. He smelled of cedar and old money. He wore a black suit that was cut so sharply it made every other man in the room look sloppy. He placed a warm hand on the back of my chair and leaned in. "Just keep smiling," he said, his voice low and calm. "Let's pretend we arrived together." I turned my head slowly. My breath caught in my throat. It had been over 40 years, but those eyes were unmistakable. It was Marcus Hale. The boy I had loved before life made us strangers was now sitting next to me. And he was no longer the poor boy from the wrong side of the tracks. He was the face on the cover of financial magazines. I looked around the room and saw heads starting to turn. The air shifted. I did not know why he was there, but I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer just the poor relation in the back row. The string quartet began to play the opening notes of Pachelbel's Canon, a melody so overused it should have felt cliché, but instead, it served as a bridge carrying my mind away from the manicured lawns of Laurel Creek Ranch. I drifted 3 states away and 40 years back, landing in a dusty town in New Mexico where the air always smelled of sagebrush and impending rain that never fell. I was 22 again, sitting on the hood of a rusted truck with Marcus. We had no air conditioning in those days, just the dry desert wind and a stack of borrowed medical textbooks. He would read chapters on cardiology to me like they were sonnets, and I would read poetry to him like it was a diagnosis. We were hungry for a world bigger than the dust we lived in, and we were foolish enough to think we could conquer it together. My mother hated that hunger. "A man with that much ambition will never be home to change a diaper." She had warned me. "You need safety, Eleanor. You need stability." She wanted Daniel. Daniel was a mechanic with grease permanently etched into his fingerprints and a heart that beat at a steady, predictable rhythm. I did what good daughters did in those days. I let Marcus go. I broke his heart and my own because I believed my mother knew best about the shape of a life. My marriage to Daniel was not a tragedy, but it was not a romance novel either. It was a partnership of survival. There were no grand vacations or diamond anniversaries. There was just a pile of bills on the kitchen counter and the endless rotation of my night shifts at the North Ridge Community Clinic. We poured everything we had, every spare dollar and every ounce of energy, into the one thing that shone bright in our grey lives: Dylan. I remembered the years I spent working double shifts. I picked up extra hours at a nursing home on weekends just to put money into a savings account for his college fund. I could still feel the phantom ache in my lower back, the way my feet would swell 2 sizes too big for my shoes by the time I walked out of the hospital at dawn. I did it without complaint. I did it because I believed I was buying my son a future that did not involve grease or bedpans. When Daniel died of a massive stroke during Dylan's senior year of college, I did not have time to grieve. I had tuition to pay. Dylan never knew that I pawned the title to my car to cover his final semester. I took the bus to work for 6 months, telling him the transmission was shot and I preferred the walk, just so he could walk across that stage without a debt hanging over his head. I looked at the man standing at the altar now, waiting for his bride. It was hard to reconcile him with the little boy who used to pin my plastic name badge to his shirt. "I'm going to make you proud, Mum," he used to say. That little boy used to look at me like I was the center of his universe. The man in the tuxedo would not even look in my direction. After Dylan found success in the startup world, our relationship had withered into a series of transactional phone calls. They were short and followed a strict formula. "How are you?" he would ask. But before I could answer, he would cut in. "Look, I'm late for a meeting. I'll visit when things calm down." But things never calmed down. I became a spectator in his life. I sat in my small house in San Marcos, watering my succulents and watching his live streams on TikTok. I listened to him tell thousands of strangers about his journey of self-reliance. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, he would say. He never mentioned the mother who walked to work so he could have those boots. I had made peace with the loneliness. I thought that was just the price of motherhood. You raise them to leave you. But sitting there in the back row, next to the kitchen staff, I realized this was not just leaving. This was erasure. Being lonely is one thing. Being told by your own child that you are a blemish to be hidden away is something else entirely. It breaks something inside you that you did not know could break. Marcus kept his hand on the back of my chair, his presence a warm weight against the cold shoulder of my solitude. He leaned in closer, his cologne mixing with the scent of the expensive floral arrangements. "Just keep smiling," he whispered, a hint of amusement in his voice. "The entire room is currently terrifying themselves trying to figure out who you are." I did not have to wait long to see what he meant. The whispers started in the row ahead of us and rippled outward like a disturbed pond. Is that Marcus Hale?" A woman to my left hissed to her husband. "The CEO of Hale Meridian Group. Why is he sitting with the groom's mother?" The tone of the room shifted instantly. The looks directed at me were no longer filled with the careless pity reserved for a poor relation. They were sharp, calculating, and laced with a sudden, confused caution. I was no longer just the mother who could not afford a better dress. I was now a mystery, a variable they had failed to account for in their social equations. Up on the altar, the ceremony was reaching its peak, but the perfection was beginning to crack. Dylan was holding Savannah's hands, ready to recite the vows he had likely rehearsed for weeks. Then he looked down. His eyes swept over the crowd and landed on the back row. He saw me, and then he saw Marcus. The color drained from my son's face so fast I thought he might faint. The words he was speaking caught in his throat, and for a terrifying second, there was dead silence on the stage. Savannah, sensing the disruption, followed his gaze, her professional smile, the one she had worn like armor all day, faltered. She looked at me, and then at the man beside me, and I saw the gears turning in her mind. She was trying to reconcile the image of the mother she had relegated to the back row with the woman now conversing with one of the most powerful financial figures in the state. I was supposed to be invisible. Instead, I had become the most interesting question in the room. I leaned toward Marcus, keeping my voice barely above a breath. "Marcus, what are you doing?" He did not look at me. He kept his eyes on the couple at the altar, his expression unreadable to anyone but me. "I am simply correcting your position in this room," he replied quietly. "At least for today." The violinists began a swelling interlude as the rings were exchanged. Cameras flashed, capturing the perfect couple. But my mind was pulling me away again. I was thinking about a train station platform 40 years ago. I was remembering the way Marcus had held my hands. "I will write every week," he had promised. "I won't let you forget me." I remembered waiting for the mail carrier every day for months, then years, until the hope dried up and turned into a dull ache. I had never understood why he went silent. I had never understood how a love that felt so loud could end so quietly. When the ceremony ended and the guests began to flood toward the cocktail area, Marcus stood up. He did not wait for the crowd to disperse. He offered me his arm, a gesture so old-fashioned and deliberate that it felt like a statement of war against everyone who had ignored me. "Shall we take a walk?" he asked. "I have a few things to tell you that I haven't had the chance to say in 40 years. We bypassed the open bar and the trays of hors d'oeuvres. We walked away from the noise, down a gravel path that led to the vineyards stretching out behind the estate. The further we walked, the more the heavy bass of the reception music faded into a dull thrum. The air here smelled of dry earth and ripening grapes. The sun was dipping low, casting long, golden shadows across the vines. Marcus stopped near a trellis heavy with ivy. He looked at me, and the mask of the powerful CEO dropped. He looked just like the boy I had known in New Mexico. "I wrote to you, Eleanor," he said, his voice rough. "I wrote dozens of letters from my dorm in Dallas. I sent them to your parents' house." I stared at him. "I never received a single one." "I know," he said. "Your mother intercepted them. She hid them, or burned them. I came back for you 3 years later, degree in hand, only to find you were already married and pregnant with Dylan." He paused, looking out over the vines. "I never married. I never found anyone who understood the silence the way we did." He looked back toward the main house, where Savannah's family was currently celebrating their merger of dynasties. A dry, humorless smile touched his lips. "Life has a strange sense of irony," he murmured. "I recently reviewed my portfolio and realized that my company owns the commercial skyscraper in downtown Austin, where Savannah's family real estate firm rents their headquarters." He looked at me. "They are celebrating their wealth just a few hundred yards away, completely unaware that the man holding the lease to their future is standing in the dirt with the woman they tried to hide." We left the suffocating opulence of Laurel Creek Ranch and drove in comfortable silence to a place that felt like a different world entirely. Lakeshore Ember was a small, weathered restaurant on the edge of the water in Austin, the kind of place where the dock creaked and the lights were strung haphazardly across wooden beams. The glow reflecting off the dark water was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, staged perfection we had just left behind. There were no photographers here, no seating charts, and no one looked at my dress like it was a dirty rag. When the waitress came, Marcus did not even look at the menu. Tomato basil soup, grilled cheese with extra sharp cheddar, and a lemon iced tea, he ordered, looking at me. For both of us. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the exact meal we used to share 3 times a week in the student union cafeteria 40 years ago. It was a simple, cheap meal. But realizing he remembered it down to the specific type of tea made my hands tremble as I reached for my napkin. As we ate, the peace of the evening was punctuated by the aggressive vibration of my phone against the wooden table. I glanced down. The screen lit up with a missed call from Dylan, then another. Then a text message from Savannah appeared. "Mum, please call back. We need to talk. Who is Marcus Hale?" For the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to apologize or explain. I looked at the screen, slid the button on the side to silence, and turned it face down next to my soup bowl. Marcus watched me do it, a small smile playing on his lips. "I saw Dylan's name on a guest list for a technology summit a few years ago," he said. "I suspected it was your son, but I didn't want to intrude. I only decided to come when I saw the wedding invitation public announcement." We talked for hours. I told him about the long night shifts at the clinic, about Daniel's kindness and his sudden death, and about the patients who could not afford their medication. "I'm used to it," I said, trying to brush off the hardships. "I'm used to being the one who carries the load." Marcus reached across the table and covered my hand with his. No, he said firmly. Just because you are used to it does not mean it is okay. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, and for a moment, the 40 years between us evaporated. Across the city, the atmosphere was likely far less peaceful. I could only imagine the scene, but I knew my son and his wife well enough to picture it. My name is Dylan, and for the first time in my marriage, I was terrified of my wife. We were back at the villa, and Savannah was not the poised bride anymore. She slammed her phone onto the marble countertop so hard I thought the screen would shatter. "Who is he?" "Dylan," she screamed. "You have to tell me who that man is. I cannot let a woman like your mother drag my entire corporation down just because of a seating arrangement." She was pacing the kitchen, listing the potential PR disasters, while I stood there, paralyzed by a shame I could not name. I pulled out my phone and typed a long text to my mother. "Mum, where are you? Please explain what is going on." I watched the status change to delivered. I waited for the read receipt. I waited for the typing bubbles. Nothing. She was not reading it. For 35 years. My mother had waited by the phone for me. Now, I was the one staring at a blank screen, realizing that the connection had been cut from her end. Marcus drove me back to my small house in San Marcos. He walked me to the porch, past the creaky swing and the pots of succulents that Daniel had loved. The night air was cool. Marcus stopped at the door and looked at me with an intensity that made me want to look away. But I didn't. "You have spent your entire existence building a stage for other people to stand on. Eleanor," he said softly, "it is time you sat in the front row of your own life." I walked inside and locked the door. The house was quiet. I showered and put on my flannel pajamas. I picked up my phone one last time. The screen was full of notifications. 5 missed calls from Dylan, 3 from Savannah, and 2 from Patricia Collins, Savannah's mother. I looked at the names that usually sent me into a panic of servitude. I thought about the years I spent trying to please them, trying to be invisible enough to not embarrass them, but present enough to be useful. I placed the phone on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. I did not call anyone back. I closed my eyes and fell into the deepest sleep I had known in years. The morning sun was already baking the dust off my front porch as I watered the row of succulents Daniel had planted years ago. They were hardy things, used to surviving on very little, which I suppose is why I felt such a kinship with them. The quiet of the morning was shattered by the crunch of gravel. A black SUV, polished to a mirror shine, pulled up to my curb. It looked like a sleek predator parked in front of my peeling fence. The door opened, and Patricia Collins stepped out. She was wearing a cream-coloured suit that probably cost more than my car, and she wore a smile that did not reach her eyes. She walked into my house without waiting for a real invitation, her heels clicking sharply on the worn linoleum. Her eyes darted around the room, cataloguing everything. She looked at the wooden rocking chair with the frayed cushion, the framed photographs of Daniel and Dylan on the wall, and the small display case holding my nursing pins. "It's cozy," she said. But the way she said it sounded like she was describing a cage at the zoo. She sat on the edge of the sofa as if she were afraid of catching a disease from the fabric. She did not waste time with small talk. She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. She wrote quickly, ripped the paper out, and placed it on the coffee table between us. It was a check for $75,000. "This isn't a bribe. Eleanor," she said, folding her hands. "It's a smart arrangement. You convince Marcus to renew the lease for my husband's company at the current rate. We forget the unpleasantness of the wedding, and everyone wins. I looked at the check. My roof had been leaking for 2 years. I had credit card debt from paying for my own dental surgery last winter. $75,000 would mean I could live without checking my bank balance every time I bought groceries. For a second, the fear of poverty rose up in my throat. But then I heard Daniel's voice in my head, clear as a bell. We might be poor, but we will never sell our kindness or our dignity. The room went silent. I picked up the check. Patricia's smile widened slightly, thinking she had won. I held her gaze as I slowly tore the paper down the middle. Then I tore it again. I gathered the confetti of blue paper and dropped the pieces onto a small ceramic saucer on the table. I pushed the saucer toward her. You can buy a lot of things, Patricia, I said calmly. But you cannot buy the memory of how I was treated at my son's wedding. Patricia stood up so fast, she knocked her knee against the table. The mask of civility vanished. Her face twisted into something ugly. If you don't cooperate, Dylan will be the one to suffer, she warned. The pressure on Savannah's company will crush him. You are being selfish. When the dust settles, no one will remember who a retired nurse was. You will just be an old woman alone in a house that is falling apart. I walked to the front door and held it open. My hands were steady. 3 days ago, you would have been right, I told her. 3 days ago, I would have done anything to save face for my son. But today is different. I would rather lose everything I own than sell myself out for a family that does not want me. Patricia stormed out, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume and the saucer of torn paper behind her. I locked the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding against my ribs. I waited until the sound of her SUV faded down the street, and then I picked up the phone and called Marcus. I told him everything. I told him about the check and the threats. On the other end of the line, Marcus laughed. It was not a joyful laugh. It was a cold, sharp sound. If money is the only language they understand, he said, then we will speak to them in their native tongue. Get dressed. Eleanor, I want you to meet me this afternoon at the Hale Meridian Group headquarters. I want you to be there when the balance of power is officially reset. The elevator doors opened on the 31st floor of the Hale Meridian Tower, revealing a world of glass and steel that felt miles above the dust of my front porch. Marcus led me into a conference room where a woman was waiting. She introduced herself as Luciana Perez, the lead counsel for the group. She was about 40, with sharp features and a demeanor that suggested she did not have the patience for nonsense. She did not offer me coffee. Instead, she dimmed the lights and projected a financial schematic onto the wall. Luciana began to dissect the financial health of Collins Realty with the precision of a surgeon. For all their posturing and country club memberships, she explained, the Collins family is leveraged to the hilt. They are debt-heavy and cash-poor. Their address in this building is their only real collateral. If they lose the lease, the perception of stability vanishes, and the creditors will descend like vultures. She turned on the lights and placed a file on the table. We have 2 options. We terminate the lease immediately based on a conduct clause, pushing them into bankruptcy. Or, she tapped the file, we offer a new lease, but with terms that are non-negotiable. Luciana read the demands aloud, her voice steady and cool. Rent increases by 20%, effective immediately. Lease term shortened to 3 years. But those are just numbers. The real teeth are in the ethical clause. She looked at me. To sign the lease, Collins Realty must issue a public apology to you. They must fund a new initiative called the Briggs Daniel Healthcare Fund to assist uninsured patients. And finally, they must fully endow the Daniel Briggs Nursing Scholarship for students from low-income backgrounds. I stopped breathing for a moment. Hearing Daniel's name spoken in this high-rise office, a name that belonged to a mechanic who scrubbed grease from his nails every night, felt surreal. Tears pricked my eyes. I looked at Marcus. "Are we going too far?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't want to be the one who burns my son's life to the ground." Marcus shook his head gently. "You are not the one lighting the fire. Eleanor. Accountability feels like an attack, only to those who are used to getting away with everything. If the Collins business model cannot survive treating people with dignity, then it deserves to fail." Luciana leaned forward. "If they sign, they survive. But they will have to live with the name Daniel Briggs on their website, in their annual reports, and on the checks they write to scholarship students. It will be a permanent monument to the man they thought was nobody." I looked at the pen lying on the polished mahogany table. My hand trembled as I picked it up. For my entire life, my signature had been a thing of no consequence. It was for permission slips and utility bills. Now, it was a weapon. I thought of Daniel working extra shifts to buy Dylan new shoes. I thought of the back row of the wedding. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. Eleanor Briggs. Luciana took the document and checked her watch. "I am sending the digital courier to the Collins legal team now. They have 72 hours to accept the terms or vacate the premises." 5 miles away, the shockwave was already hitting. Dylan stood in the foyer of his oversized house. The phone pressed to his ear. His father-in-law, Richard Collins, was screaming so loud the distortion crackled through the speaker. "Fix this, Dylan." Richard yelled. "You get your mother under control and stop that old man before the entire family is dragged down to the bottom." Dylan stood there, listening to the panic in the voice of a man who had always seemed untouchable, and felt the cold realization that the ground beneath him was dissolving. I am looking into the camera lens of my phone right now, and there are thousands of you watching, waiting for the next tip on how to optimize your network or leverage your assets. But I need to tell you the truth about why I blocked my mother. It was not because she was toxic. It was not because she was intrusive. It was because she said no. 2 months before the wedding, I asked her to take out a second mortgage on her house to provide a bridge loan for my company's latest expansion. She looked at the paperwork, her hands rough from 40 years of washing misery off other people, and she refused. I remember standing in her small kitchen, the smell of stale coffee in the air, screaming at her. "You always think small," I had yelled. "You are the reason we have always been poor. You don't understand how to take a calculated risk." She stood by the sink and said quietly, "The only thing I understand about risk, Dylan, is the look on the faces of patients who lost their homes because they listened to men who promised high returns." That was the moment I snapped. I pulled out my phone and blocked her right in front of her face. "I want you to know what it feels like to be completely cut out of my life," I told her. I thought I was teaching her a lesson. But for the last 72 hours, while the clock ticked down on the ultimatum from Hale Meridian, I have been the one living in a panic attack. My startup is heavily integrated with Collins Realty. If they go under, my contracts dissolve. I tried to call her a dozen times yesterday. Every single call went straight to voicemail. I sent texts begging her to talk. They all showed as delivered, but the read receipt never appeared. I stared at that grey status text and realized for the first time what I had actually done. I had created a wall of silence, and now that I was the one on the outside banging on the door, I understood how cold it was out here. The worst part was watching Savannah. We were sitting in our living room, and she was discussing the situation with the cold detachment of a crisis manager. "What is the most effective way to handle the old woman?" she asked, looking at her tablet. Hearing those words come out of my wife's mouth triggered a memory I had buried deep. I remembered coming home from college one winter break. My mother had just finished a 12-hour shift. Her feet were so swollen she had to soak them in a plastic tub of ice water. But she was still standing at the stove stirring a pot of stew because she knew it was my favorite. I looked at Savannah, beautiful and terrifying, and I realized she had never cooked a meal for me in her life. She called my mother a burden, an ugly stain on the family image, and I sat there and let her say it. The pressure from the Collins family was becoming suffocating. Richard called me every hour. Savannah was more subtle, but far more dangerous. "If you let your sentimentality destroy my father's legacy," she told me, "I will have to seriously reconsider the viability of our marriage." I started to wonder if I had been lying to myself for years. I had convinced myself I was pushing my mother away for my own growth, but sitting there in the wreckage of my own ambition, I realized I had just been scared. I was scared of being poor again. I was scared of the judgment of people like the Collins family. I had treated my mother exactly the way they treated her. I could not take the silence anymore. I got into my car and drove to San Marcos. I needed to see her. I pulled up to the curb, but the driveway was empty. The shades were drawn. I walked up the path and checked the mailbox. It was empty, except for a single large envelope. The return address was the legal department of Hale Meridian Group. The addressee was Eleanor Briggs. I knocked on the door, but the sound echoed in a hollow house. She was not there. She was gone. For the first time in my 35 years, my mother had not waited for me to come home. I stood on the porch with the realized fear that this time, I was the one who had been left behind. The 72 hours bled away into a tense silence inside the glass walls of the Hale Meridian office. We were gathered around the mahogany conference table when the phone finally rang. It was Richard Collins. His voice came through the speakerphone, tight and clipped. "We will sign," he said. "We accept every single term, including the scholarship fund, but no more games, no more public humiliation." Marcus leaned toward the speaker, his face impassive. "No one is manufacturing humiliation, Richard. We are simply dragging the truth out into the light. Whatever happens after that is entirely your choice." He pressed the button to end the call, leaving a heavy silence hanging in the air. Luciana looked up from her tablet. "The Collins legal team has selected the venue for the public apology. It is to be the Children of the Hill Country Charity Gala." My stomach dropped. "I can't do it," I whispered. "I want justice. But the thought of standing in a room full of strangers while they dissect my life, it's terrifying." Marcus turned his chair to face me. He took my hand. "For your entire life, you have listened to people talk about you and judge you," he said. "Tomorrow night, let them apologize to your face, not behind your back." The gala was a sea of sequins and camera flashes. The air smelled of expensive catering and ambition. I wore a simple black dress that I had owned for 6 years, walking in on Marcus's arm. I felt the room shift. People who had looked right through me at the wedding were now staring. It was not the stare of dismissal anymore. It was the stare of people realizing they had underestimated the woman in the black dress. When the time came, Richard and Savannah stood on the stage. They looked small under the harsh spotlights. Savannah's face was pale. They read from the statement Luciana had drafted. "We admit," Richard said into the microphone, his voice stiff, "that we made remarks that insulted the dignity of Eleanor Briggs. We failed to uphold the respect due to a senior member of the community." Every word sounded like it was being pulled out of them with pliers. The master of ceremonies invited me up. I walked the steps, my legs shaking, but my head high. I took the microphone. I did not scream. I did not rage. I looked out at the dark room. "I accept your admission," I said simply. "Forgiveness does not happen in a single night, but facing the truth is the first step. Tonight, at least, we have taken that step." From the stage, I saw Dylan standing in the front row. He looked shattered. For the first time, he was not looking at the floor or his phone. He was looking at me. He was seeing a woman who could command a room, not just the mother he had shoved into the back corner. After the event, Marcus walked me to his car in the valet lot. I heard running footsteps behind us. "Mom." It was Dylan. He was breathless and desperate. I stopped and turned around. He looked like a little boy lost in a supermarket. I looked at him for a long moment. "There are some conversations that are too late to have in a parking lot. Dylan," I told him gently, "when you are ready to speak as my son, and not as a man afraid of losing a contract, find me. For now, I am going to rest." I got into the car with Marcus, and as we drove away, I watched my son standing alone under the buzzing neon lights, finally understanding what it meant to be the one left behind. After the gala, I did not go home and wait by the phone for an apology. I went home and packed a suitcase. I sat on the edge of my bed and opened the settings on my phone. I looked at the contact names that had brought me so much anxiety over the last few years. Dylan, Savannah. With a calm that surprised even me, I blocked them both. When Dylan had done this to me months ago, it was an act of aggression designed to hurt. When I did it, it was an act of self-preservation. I left Austin the next morning. I accepted Marcus's invitation to go to Santa Fe for a few weeks. The air there was different, thinner and cleaner. We spent our days walking through the desert and our evenings looking at architectural blueprints. We were designing the Briggs Daniel Community Room, which was going to be the heart of the new building. It was not going to be a stuffy boardroom. It was going to be a sanctuary with soft armchairs and walls of books. While I was finding my peace in the desert, the reality of the contract was settling over Austin like a heavy fog. The Collins Realty Group was bleeding. The rent increase was significant, but the mandatory contributions to the charity fund were astronomical. The name Daniel Briggs was suddenly everywhere. The business community whispered about the price of arrogance. They called it the most expensive seating chart error in the history of Texas real estate. My name is Dylan, and I am currently sitting in a house that feels too big and too quiet. I have spent the last 2 weeks trying to break through the silence my mother built. I called her every morning. I sent emails. Everything was blocked. I was experiencing the exact isolation I had forced on her. I drove to her house in San Marcos yesterday. I let myself in with the spare key. The house was immaculate. Sitting on the kitchen table was a single document. It was a printed scan of the final agreement between Hale Meridian and Collins Realty. I stared at the signature line. Eleanor Briggs. Her signature was right there, bold and unshakable, sitting next to Marcus Hale and Richard Collins. I sat down and read the contract. I looked for the payout. I looked for the clause where she got $1 million. I read every line of the fine print. She had taken nothing, not one single dime. She had forced my in-laws to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to help strangers, to help people like my father. But she had not kept a penny for herself. I sat in her kitchen and felt small. I had told the world she was bitter and vindictive. I was wrong. She was not taking revenge. She was resetting the moral order of the universe, desperate for an answer. I drove to the Hale Meridian Tower and demanded to see Luciana Perez. I marched into her office. "Where is she?" I demanded. "I have a right to speak to my mother." Luciana looked at me with eyes that were entirely devoid of sympathy. "Sit down, Dylan." She leaned forward. "Your mother did not hire me to protect herself from the Collins family. She hired me to protect herself from you." I froze. "What?" She knew that if you came to her crying and begging, her motherly instinct would be to forgive you too quickly. Luciana said coldly. She put a lawyer between us to ensure she did not cave in to her own soft heart. That was the moment the wall became real. I had spent my adult life pushing her away to prove I was a man. And now that she had finally pushed back, I realized I was just a child standing outside a locked door. The morning we prepared to leave Santa Fe, Marcus received an urgent email from Luciana. The fallout at Collins Realty had gone from a tremor to an earthquake. Their shareholders were calling for an emergency meeting. It seemed that treating people like furniture had finally become a liability on their balance sheet. On the drive back to Austin, we stopped at the new Hale Meridian building. I walked into the ground floor space. I saw a temporary sign hanging above the double glass doors, Briggs Daniel Community Room. Below it, in smaller letters, it said, "Open to everyone, regardless of income." My eyes burned, but I did not cry. When I pulled up to my house in San Marcos, I saw a figure sitting on the concrete steps of the porch. It was Dylan. He was not wearing his usual tailored suit. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans. He looked exhausted. He did not knock. He just sat there. I opened the car door and walked up the path. Dylan looked up. He did not start with an excuse. "I understand now," he said, his voice cracking. "When I blocked you, I thought I was punishing you. But when you went silent on me, I realized that what you were doing was saving yourself." He stood up, his hands hanging loosely by his sides. I read the contract. "Mum, I saw Dad's name on the scholarship fund. You didn't take a single thing for yourself." He wiped his face. "The only person who has truly taken revenge on me is my own conscience." I looked at him, my anger gone, replaced by a deep, heavy fatigue. It took me a lifetime to understand that respecting myself did not mean I had to hate anyone else, I told him. But I also spent too many years thinking I had to sit in the back row just because you were afraid people would laugh at you. Dylan dropped to his knees, right there on the front porch. It was the first time I had seen him cry since the day his father died. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I'm not sorry about the business deal. I'm sorry I let my fear and my ambition turn you into a public relations risk instead of the mother who raised me." I did not pull him up immediately. "If you want to walk back into my life, Dylan, there are conditions," I said. You will attend the opening of the community room. You will sign a commitment to match a portion of the funding for the Patient Aid Fund using your own company profits. And the next time you stand on a stage to tell your success story, you will mention me as a source of pride, not as a poverty story you overcame. Dylan looked up at me and nodded. I will, he whispered. I promise. The opening ceremony was crowded. There were students, my old patients from the clinic, and local journalists. A large photo of Daniel, smiling his gentle smile, hung on the back wall. The master of ceremonies invited me to the podium. I looked out at the crowd. I saw Marcus standing in the corner, watching me with quiet pride. I saw Dylan standing in the front row, holding his camera. I kept my speech short. I told the story of the back row. There are some children who take a long time to learn how to listen, I said, looking at my son. But as long as they are willing to learn, there is always a road back home. Dylan was recording a vlog from the floor. His eyes were wet. He spoke into his phone. If you are thinking about blocking your mother to prove you are grown up, you need to listen to this story until the very end. Marcus walked over and took my hand. There was no second wedding, no fireworks, and no grand party. There was just an older woman, a man who had waited 40 years, and a son who was finally learning how to say he was sorry. The Collins family paid with their money and their reputation. Dylan paid by facing his own reflection. And I finally took my seat in the front row of my own life, not because anyone gave it to me, but because I finally stood up and walked there myself. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please drop a comment down below and let me know where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.